Right, good morning everybody. Thank you very much for coming to the debate this morning. We've got quite a small group actually, so this could be quite interactive and quite lively, I think, especially with the panel we have with us here. I've got a few slides just to sort of position what's going on in the market, what we need to be aware of, what's coming our way as landlords. And you know, I actually think this is probably the most important session of the whole show. Maybe not the most exciting because, you know, compliance and regulation, you know, we all want to get out there and do deals and, you know, grow our portfolios and stuff. But if you don't get this bit right, then everything else can be a bigger problem. So there's lots to know about. This is the panel we've got here. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. So just hang on, guys, before you introduce yourselves. But we've got Sean from the Property Redress, the PRS, Property Redress Scheme, David Cox Rightmove, James Kent from Safe2, and myself from AlphaLets. So we'll intro ourselves in a moment. But just to set the scene a little bit, let's just talk about what's happening, okay, and also what we can do about it to make sure we're completely covered here. So you may not know, but in the last few years, there's been 168 pieces of legislation. Okay, this isn't an exaggeration, this is the actual number. This is Sean's slide, so I'm sure he can elaborate on that. And over 400 regulations. So this is not going away, and it's not shrinking, it's just growing, okay? So, you know, what I'm seeing at AlphaLets is, the smaller landlords are finding it very, very tough because they're busy, with that, they're quite often doing a full-time job as well as trying to manage portfolios. But the bigger landlords are thriving. A lot of them are doing really, really well. They're growing their portfolios, but that's because they have good systems in place and they understand how it all works and so on. So that's some of the stuff we want to talk to you about today. And if you look at, you know, this is the sort of shock factor that is really important. You know, fines now it's not a slap on the wrist and a £50 fine. You know, fines can be up to £30,000 now. It's actually quite scary, and there's nothing more than the press seem to love than a landlord's getting a whopping great big fine. So, you know, we have to make sure we've got our bases covered. And here are the top reasons. It's things like failure to license your HMO or buy-to-let. And there's a lot of talk, especially about HMOs around this. Having the wrong fire detections or alarms, something that is easily overlooked. Unprotected escape routes, non-compliant, non-fire doors, trip and fall hazards. You know, I actually had a tenant fall down some stairs and break a leg. It was an awful experience. Luckily, we sorted it all out. But those are the sort of things that, you know, that the government is now trying to regulate and make sure that everyone is protected. Damp and mold. How many times has this come up? You know, I've been through this myself as well, and you know, mold is a really difficult one because I've got a flat. It's a downstairs flat, and they had a small child, and they hung all their washing on all the radiators around the flat, and guess what? They got mold. Never had mold before, but it's one of those where it's, well, is that really a landlord issue, or is it a tenant thing, or is it a bit of both? And how do we keep on top of that stuff? And of course, poor and heating and so on. So I wanted to put those slides up just to sort of frame the discussion. It is a debate, so you know, feel free to ask your questions. But before we do that, let me just hand over to the panel, okay? And let's do some intros. So Sean, can you tell us a little bit about the PRS and what you guys do and so on?
Right, so I'm Sean Hooker. I'm Head of Redress at the Property Redress Scheme, and we are one of the two organisations that all property agents have to be a member of to deal with their complaints. So basically, we're like an ombudsman, and we deal with complaints against letting agents, estate agents, property managers in leasehold, and a variety of other ones that are not by law having to join, but have joined us as property professionals. I don't know how many of you are landlords out there in the audience, but most of you. But did you know that you can make a complaint against your letting agent through the property redress scheme or the property ombudsman? This is, what we actually do. I don't know if any of you are out there who are property sourcers, so this is a new kind of area. Did you know that if you are a property sourcer and you deal with sales, you have to be a member of a redress scheme, but you also are a customer of letting agents and estate agents. So you have your foot in both camps on that. So, but we deal with complaints, escalated complaints, and what we try and do is stop things going to court. We try and resolve your disputes with your agent and make sure that we can come to a satisfactory resolution.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sean. We'll come back to the questions in a moment, but that's really helpful. Thank you. So then we've got David from Rightmove.
Hi, I'm David Cox. I'm Rightmove's General Counsel. I'm going to assume most people know who Rightmove is and what Rightmove does. But just to give you an idea, we are the country's largest property portal. Last year, just under 750,000 properties were advertised for sale or let on Rightmove, and approximately 2.5 billion users spent 18.5 billion minutes on the website.
Very nice. Okay. Thank you for that. Some good stats. And James Kent from Safe2.
Yeah, good morning. I'm James. I founded a platform called Safe2. It's a compliance platform to help or to enable landlords and letting agents to use tech for property safety certificates. I'm lucky enough to be welcomed into the NRLA family recently, and we're here to sort of champion for the sector and be the voice of landlords.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. And myself, I know two of you in the audience already. I'm Richard. I'm the founder of AlphaLets. I'm also a long-time landlord. Excuse me. I've been a landlord for probably 25 plus years now. And in the early days, it was so simple. All we needed was a spreadsheet. And now it's become so complicated that times have changed. And I was looking myself for a good bit of software to help me manage my portfolio. I'm from a tech background, couldn't find the right software, so hence AlphaLets was formed about 4 years ago. And right in the middle of the page, I put this slide up because right in the middle, we put our integrated task management system, because it's probably one of the most important things to do, just keeping on top of, it's not just compliance, but insurance and so on. So hopefully we've got a pretty good panel ahead of you today. So let me say, actually before I get on to the why now, are there any questions? Does anyone have any immediate worries that you'd like to ask the panel? You've got the panel right here at your disposal. Sean, I'll ask you one actually, if I can start it off. So, fines we know are £30,000 or can be. How many of those are, actually happening in the market? I know that's the headline that we will see in the papers, but is that happening a lot, or is that gaining traction? Or?
It's getting better. So if this was a year ago or even 18 months ago, I would say that a lot of the local authorities out there were not actually performing and undertaking the enforcement that they should do. In fact, our good friends at the NRLA did a big report on compliance and found that I think it was about 3 London boroughs accounted for 75% of all the prosecutions in the country. So anybody who's from the London Borough of Newham or Tower Hamlets, watch your backs, but anywhere else in the country you were getting away with it. But to be fair, I've watched it and it started to ramp up. So my organisation, parent organisation, we also own something called Landlord Zone. Very highly recommend you subscribe to that. It's a forum and also a news one. And we are now getting 4 to 5 stories a week at least on massive fines that are being handed out, and these range from rent repayment orders, which is basically if you have not complied with HMO regulations or health and safety regulations, you can end up paying your tenant all the rent back over the period of time that they were there, and civil penalties and banning orders. We've actually had in the last few months we've watched 3 or 4 banning orders coming through. This is taking a landlord and actually banning them from ever or for a period of time from renting out property. So it is ramping up, and I think that the local authorities are getting cute because they can keep the money, and your council are short of money. So this is why they like their licensing schemes. This is why they like handing out the fines. So you have to watch your back because they'll be on you like a rash because it's money into their coffers.
And
I
so
think-
what? Sorry, David.
Just to add to that, and something that we've noticed recently is we're getting a lot higher number of statutory requests from local authorities. So they will come to us, particularly thinking about rent repayment orders. When was the property listed for let? So that they can work out, because we will have stats, it went on this date, it went off that date. They will then be able to work out when the start date of the tenancy was for rent repayment orders. So we're getting more than you would expect. I'm not going to put an actual figure on it,
Wow.
but we're getting from local authorities up and down the country. I do think you missed one local London borough that seems to be particularly vociferous at the moment, which is Lewisham. So if anybody is...
I south of the river, I don't.
Yeah. Anybody in Lewisham, watch your backs. They are watching like a hawk the listings that are going on site at the moment. And we, particularly Lewisham Council, we get so many requests from them. Did it contain this piece of information? Did it contain that piece of information? Wow. And because they are under the Investigatory Powers Act, they are allowed to ask, and we are compelled to give. So not just us as any business is compelled when asked under the Investigatory Powers Act. We have
Can
to
you
give
guys
the
talk a
information.
little bit about why some councils have licensing as well as all the other regulation? Because I've got one myself. I've got a flat, and we obviously comply to all the regulation. And then I get a thing through from the council saying you now need to buy a license on top of all that, which seems to be localised because not all councils do it, but just some do. So,
Do you want to keep the PC answer and then I'll give the
So give us-
slightly less PC
Okay,
We're in a
answer?
good debate here.
Okay, so essentially, what's called an HMO, which you all know, which is a property of higher multiple occupancy. They have, it's mandatory to license all of those properties, but a lot of other councils also have selective or additional licensing on top of it. So the reason for that is a variety of different reasons, and I would say the two legitimate ones, and then maybe
I'll just
David
share
can
some
talk
views.
about the other one. But it's essentially they want to, because of their planning their plans, they don't want they want to regulate the number of HMO properties in certain areas. So if it's a family residential area, they don't necessarily want people buying those properties up and converting them into HMOs. And it's also health and safety within those HMOs, because when you convert a property into an HMO, you need to take into consideration a lot more health and safety issues than if you are just having it for a family home. So yeah, that's a licensing. It's very controversial. It comes down to perception in some ways, but also some councils have basically set up these schemes and not done any enforcement, and it just seems to be a way of getting money out of the landlords.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of...
Of course, yes. Please do.
On the licensing, can they do that retrospect? So like an Article 4 or HMO, you either set up an HMO if it's an Article 4 area. Can it then retrospectively become an Article 4 area, and then they retrospectively require that HMO to have a licence, even though it's been set up maybe 5 years before they brought in the Article 4?
So an Article 4 is a planning for HMOs rather than
They're linked, but they're
licensing. So with an Article 4 direction, if they designate an area in Article 4, the house will automatically, if it's already an HMO, then it will automatically become a C4 HMO.
Yeah.
Under the permitted development order, you will be able to automatically revert it back to a C3 family dwelling house, but then, so say you've got students in it at the moment, so when the designation came in, it was an HMO. Your next set of tenants are then a family. It will automatically transfer back to a C3 dwelling house. But if you then, the tenants after that, you then want to put students in, for example, then you'll have to reapply for planning permission to turn it back into a C4 HMO. And then, depending, as Sean said, normally it's 20% within a 100 chimney pot radius.
Okay, so you're talking about the licensing, which is separate from the...
No, that's the planning one. Licensing, once the designation comes into force, if you meet the criteria, you have to get the license at that point in time.
How many people here have HMOs? Okay, about half, and everyone else houses, flats. Yeah, Yeah, so it's,
It was one of the problems when, especially when Article 4s came in about, I was still at the NLA, so a decade ago. A lot of places, so one of the first places and somewhere that the NLA, as it was back then, actually put in a judicial review challenge to was Portsmouth, because what used to happen in Portsmouth was students would live in the properties during term time, and then they would be holiday lets during summer holiday, and then the student, which worked for the students because then they only pay 10 months of the year. But when the council created the Article 4 direction, they couldn't lose the C4 HMO, so the landlords couldn't put the families in during the summer, and it effectively killed the holiday let market.
Yeah.
It also meant that students in Portsmouth had to pay 12 months rent again as opposed to 10 months rent.
Right.
So it entirely backfired, and this is primarily the purpose of licensing. So I remember a few years ago I gave evidence before a select committee on licensing, and there is absolutely no evidence anywhere in the country in the last 15 years that a licensing scheme has actually achieved the desired results. Anywhere at all. And even Newham, we are in the London Borough of Newham, the first pan-borough selective licensing scheme. Sir Robin Wales pumped millions and millions and millions of pounds into enforcement. 10 years later has had absolutely no impact whatsoever on property conditions in the London Borough of Newham. However, it's the NIMBY issue, and people going to their councillors saying this bad landlord down the road, this bad property, these bad tenants, and they are being created not because they are solving a housing issue, but to give politicians an opportunity to say we've got tough on the private rented sector in our area at the expense of landlords. And people have different views on the fact that the council gets the money in. Yep, that keeps the people employed in the councils, but it doesn't actually make the councils money. Newham lost millions on their scheme. Liverpool lost, I think, tens of millions on their scheme when they did it. It actually ends up losing the councils a lot more than it gains, but it gets politicians re-elected. Sorry if that's a very cynical response.
Yeah.
Hi. From Sean, property redressal scheme manager. If the state agent is not a member of a PRS, or wasn't, like online estate agent, how are we supposed to pursue the, basically complain against, to the next stage apart from the court, basically? Because as far as you know, Estate Agent Act doesn't apply to online estate agents.
It does.
Can I, Sean, before you answer that question, can I just repeat it, because we've got a camera at the back and they may not be able to hear you over there. So the question is, the PRS can prosecute, bricks and mortar, if you like, estate agents for shops and so on. But if they're an online agent, how do you guys handle that?
Right, so online agents are covered under the Act as much as a high street, or what we see a lot of is people, not even setting up offices, they're working from home. Everybody is covered if they are managing a property under the definitions of letting agency or estate agency. But,
Sorry, we do respect letting agent, yes, but not, basically estate agent, like a sale or marketing,
Okay, if they are engaging in the sale of property or the buying or selling of property, they are covered by the estate agents regulations, and they have to be a member of a redress scheme. Now, this is where it becomes a little bit controversial and silly, and it needs to be addressed. Because the estate agency regulations are older than the letting agency regulations, the worst case scenario is if you're not a member of a redress scheme as an estate agent, the fine is only £1,000. Now it's 5,000 for a letting agent, which it should be really 30,000, because things have moved on. And also, how do you track these people down? Because they don't actually. If you've got an office, I know that if you are a local authority and you can look at at an estate agent, you can walk into their office, you can look at them online. You can pin them down. A lot of these online agents, where are they? They're national. So who actually will take